take it away.
Thanks, honored to be here. I was quite flattered by Fadi's call because I was supposed to stop work actually. I thought, do I really want to do all this speaking stuff? But I'm flattered because it's really, it's kind of humbling actually. My roles have been very humbling, and particularly my roles working in small organizations. And something about it's very nice when you've left effectively full-time work, where you're asked to come back to speak to people of organizations that I really respect, because I've seen a lot of your organizations work in the field in the UK. I'll talk particularly about the UK. But I'm going to galvanize you to action, because I think that all of the problems we have at the moment are an action call for charities, because the role of civil society has never been more important than it is now, whether internationally or in the UK. And I think the UK has some issues too, not just the state. There's something good about that. I would say when I speak to charities in the coal phase, I have enormous respect for what you do. I think you do the toughest roles in the sector. I think it's much harder to run a small charity than it is to run a large charity with a highly paid executive and a good board. It's tough running a small organization. I know that often employment's very precarious. People don't have secure contracts. It's hard to get trustees. You face issues that large charities don't. And I want to pay tribute to that, especially in the environment in the UK, where I know through all of the charities we were escorted for 10 years when I was at the foundation, demand is going up, the complexity amount is going up, so things are getting tougher actually, and money is tight. And I just want to say to you that day in, day out, you don't see what you do as being extraordinary, but as, if you like, for 10 years I was an outsider looking in at your work, I think what you do is extraordinary, and you ought to congratulate yourselves for that. And never lose sight of how important you are. When Fadi and I spoke, he asked me to talk about three things. First of all, best practice to small grassroots charities. Secondly, how to make the greatest difference. And thirdly, what specifically I think Muslim charities can offer. Some of this might be specific to small charities in the UK, some not. But I'm a firm believer, after working in the sector and with the sector in it for 40 years, in a particular charity model, and I'll talk about that bit as we go along. And working for 40 years hasn't changed that. But first, a few words about small grassroots charities. Why do I think they were? Having visited literally hundreds of them in the last 10 years. I think there's a paradox that people with running large charities don't get, actually, that small charities are better able to engage with complex issues and people with complex problems than large charities. Because they don't see somebody as an issue. They see somebody as an individual and treat that person as an individual. And I think one of the things they're able to do is establish and provide bespoke support in a way that large charities can't. It's much more standardized what large charities do. And they do that, I think, because they establish trust. And I think often you're establishing trust with people whose society neither trusts nor do they trust society. A society in some way has shafted them, it's sanctioned them, it's taken away their children, it's removed their benefits. That's the experience of many of the people that you're trying to reach if you're on the coalface of poverty in Britain today, dealing with poverty or homelessness, or people who are victims of the justice system, whether it's victims or as perpetrators. People who have arrived here from elsewhere, if you're a refugee, a lot of refugees and refugees around the world, facing issues in a country that is not familiar to them. And I think you establish trust for three reasons, and actually Halima touched on some of that. I think partly because you are of the communities that you serve. Secondly, because you have experience too of those communities, and you're local. If you're from Birmingham, you speak with a Brummie accent. It matters, actually. It's not a Londoner coming to talk to Brummies, it's somebody with a Brummie accent. If you work in Liverpool, you speak like a Scouse. That's really, really important. And you're not judgmental. You see people as they are. That's a tremendous thing, and I visited small charities all over the country in the last 10 years in my role at the foundation. Charities like the Harbour Project, working in Swindon, which works with refugees coming from Somalia and Sudan and Eritrea. The Newport Yemeni Community Project, which is an extraordinary organisation which works with the young people of Newport, run by Yemenis, fantastic community centre around football, engaging people. Marshanti, just up the road on the Holloway Road, which Marshanti, if you may know, is a Hindu word for mother peace, and it works with South Asian women experiencing domestic violence, whether they're Muslims or Hindus. Initially, it is the Asian Lone Women's Association. But it's easy for me to eulogize about small charities, and I do pay tribute to you. When I spoke at CAS, I think there are 5 things at Bays as it is now, 5 things that characterize the best charities, whether they're large or small, international or local. Firstly, they're funded on activism and radicalism. They started because a few people got together in a room and said, we're going to be thinking about this issue. We're going to make a difference. Some are just the same, 2 or 3 people in a room. It's now large. Small charities are just the same. They're doggedly determined. They're going to challenge the status quo. Marshanti, working with women experiencing violence in the Muslim community and the Hindu community. They're innovative. They address problems in ways others wouldn't think about. The Yemeni Community Association has engaged people with football. So it's engaging kids who otherwise would be getting into all kinds of mischief and using football as a means to access them and their families. And they're able to share. There are some fantastic charity models of sharing. Emmaus in particular, a homeless organization, which actually shares what it does openly with other Emmaus organizations, so the old papier. Finally, they advocate the influence, and I'm going to talk more about that because I think there's a problem at the heart of small charities. And actually, many charities at the time are nervous about what we can say. Many small charities face completely overwhelming demand in scale and complexity. It can only go so far given the demand you place on your volunteers and the money that you have. And we've seen in the sector that demand is way outstripping supply. And I've seen charities trying to adopt the kind of things that public sector organizations do, queues and triage and telephone assessment. I think it's awful. It's not our role to mimic what public sector does and actually mirror some of the worst of public sector. It's to present something different. Ultimately, though, you are going to be faced with so much demand, you are going to have to ration. You're going to have to make choices about who to support and not support. And the risk is that by doing that, you compound the very inequality that you're seeking to reach, because there are those who supported you and those who aren't, and they're both as deserving. So the question is, how do you reach more people? In the past, in the Blair era, we had a government that wanted you to do more. It told us all to get involved in contracts, what matters is what works. And we saw charities mirror the public sector. And then George Osborne came and austerity. The contracts were squeezed. Then they saw charities become part of the problem because they started to provide substandard services to people because that was the cheapest way to provide them. So people already had services. How it's spent. That's politics with a capital P, and I'm going to talk about politics because we have to name it. Those decisions on what to spend and where to spend it are made in Whitehall, or if you're in Scotland, the Scottish Parliament, or the Senate, or Stormont, wherever you were. They'll be made in town halls and they'll be made in city halls. And if charities care about the people they can't reach as well as the ones they can, they need to get into politics. And this is not a party political point at all. It's true irrespective of who is in power. Because in fact, this Labour government in many ways has been harder on some of the issues that you represent than the last government was. Who would have thought a Labour government would reduce international aid to 0.3% of GDP? Who would have thought that? Who would have thought they would reduce benefits for people who are disabled or where they are? Who would have thought that? Why are we not out on the streets? If this was the Tories doing that, we'd be out on the streets protesting. And yet we sit there, suppliant, because it's the Labour government, thank God. So this isn't politics with a big P, but it is politics with a small p. Because I think as charities, we have to influence the debate nationally about how our money is spent and how it's raised and where it's spent and who receives it. Because if we do not, the right will do it for us. Because you have the right activating very, very well, campaigning on a different lexicon. The Farage reform has not gone away. It's there like a spectre waiting for us. And if we are silent, that's what we're going to get. And we know what that will mean. It will be Trump-like hat or Trump-like this sort of pond. None of us could do that alone. So I would absolutely argue we need to work collectively and we need to work intelligently. And to pick up the political point that just got challenged, quite rightly challenges on, it has to be based on evidence. But you have the evidence from what you see. One of the problems with all government is it will never make long-term decisions because it's always got its eye on the next election. And many of the things that you'll want to see by a long-term preventative approach is proper investment in housing, proper investment in employment and education. These are the things that transcend one political cycle, but they're not the things that transcend the work you do. They're the things that are core to what you do. Because all of us are ending up picking the pieces on the system that's failed somebody earlier on in their life. And those are the things that as charities have to be must major on. I think it matters more to Black, Asian and minority ethnic peoples than any. Because we saw in COVID how we disproportionately affected. More people from South Asia died, partly because of employment nowhere. It's the absolute representation in mortality data of inequality and inequity in Britain today. And we see ourselves often juxtapositioned with a black v brown and white working class, and I think this is really problematic. There's a need to work very closely with white working class communities who are equally disadvantaged to many Muslim communities in some of the poorer parts of Britain. So as Muslim charities, I would argue, it's my third point, what's your role? You are geographically perfectly placed to do this because you are strongest in the blue wall or the red wall. That's where you are strongest. Your community is strongest in those areas. And we saw that trickle about a little bit in the Gaza effect, with some very senior MPs in Bristol losing their seats because Gaza swung it. So you could see the power of the Muslim community to act and influence things nationally and actually potentially to swing an election when that red and blue wall is so more important. So I would say to you, you are far more influential than you think, partly because you are geographically concentrated, partly because you're bound by faith, not self-interest, and that's a very powerful thing, partly because you're instinctively community focused. in the way that your communities work. But it requires you to try to reach those beyond you can reach directly. To build that based on investment of what you do, understanding what you do with all the evidence around that, and bringing together, as Adima has said, the ability to bring voice to people directly into policy, because you are in touch with those people on the ground. So if I have one message in closing that needs to you, which would be, along with my thanks and appreciation for all you do, is to use the power you have to see positive change. I don't pretend to be easy, but it might release some of the guilt you are going to experience because of the needs you can't meet. Because actually, you may achieve more by reaching people indirectly through influence based on what you learn than you will directly. And I think for the next decade, all of us have to be right at the center of that debate of how money is raised in this country and how it's spent geographically and across communities. Thanks very much.
Can you hear it?